Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. It was another big weekend of box office news as the Fantastic Four First Steps hit theaters and had a somewhat familiar box office performance. We're going to talk about all that and the rest of the box office news, and let's jump right into it by looking at the top 10 from this past weekend. And at number one was the Fantastic Four First Steps with a $117.6 million opening weekend. The estimates about where this thing was going to open were all over the place. Some people were saying 100 million, some were saying 140. This is one of those movies that did seem to drop a little bit as the weekend went on, and we're going to look at how it performed day by day in comparison to the number two movie at the box office this past weekend, which was Superman in its third week. It dropped 57.5%, which isn't terrible given the fact that it had direct competition from another comic book film. It's not an amazing hold, but it's not a terrible hold either. It brought in $24.8 million. It's approaching $300 million domestically because of its strong opening and its pretty good second week hold. Jurassic World Rebirth continues to hold pretty well in its fourth weekend. It dropped 44.3% with another $13.2 million. It has passed the $300 million domestic mark, although Superman will be surpassing it in short order. F1 the movie, that movie is held really well by percentage, 36.2% in weekend number 5, but another $6.3 million. They're good holds by percentage, but they're not massive weekends. It's made $165.6 million domestically thus far. Smurfs dropped 50% for a $5.4 million weekend number 2. At number 6 was I Know What You Did Last Summer, which had a horror movie drop of 59.2%. Not the worst case scenario considering how the movie was received. Another $5.2 million. How to Train Your Dragon sticks around in the top 10 for a 7th week. It dropped 46.3% and brought in another $2.9 million. Eddington did have the drop that you would expect, a 62.2% drop in a $1.6 million weekend. It's at 8.1 total. Not a very impressive box office run. There's really no way to sugarcoat that. Sayara, which is a movie from India, the numbers on this one were all over the place, but the one that I decided to go with was a $1.2 million second weekend. That's a 64% increase from the week before and a $3.2 million total. That's unusual for a film from India. Usually we see a bigger debut in weekend 1 and a drop-off in weekend number 2, but here we saw an increase in the second weekend. And rounding out the top 10 was the movie Oh Hi, which was in limited release. It brought in $1.1 million. Dropping out of the top 10 this past week, we had Lilo and Stitch after 9 weeks, so it's going to stay tied with Sinners unless it can get back up into the top 10 for the longest run in the top 10 so far this year. Elio and 28 Years Later are both out after 5 weeks each. And looking at the biggest theater count changes, Elio lost the most this past weekend, almost half of its theaters, 995 of them. It is clinging onto wide release in 1,040 theaters. 28 Years Later lost 702 theaters. It's out of wide release. It's in 517. Megan 2.0 lost the vast majority of the rest of its theaters, 565 of them. It's now in just 147. Lilo and Stitch goes out of wide release. It lost 540 theaters. It's now in 785. And How to Train Your Dragon lost a chunk of theaters. It lost 489, but it's still in 2,346. This is what I like to call our road to recovery. The red line is the box office weekend average for 2021 to 2024. The blue line is 2015 to 2019, and the dotted black line is every weekend this year. And you can see that the opening of Fantastic Four, along with the continued performance of Superman and Jurassic World Rebirth, took us above where we have been post-pandemic, as well as the average of where we were pre-pandemic. Not by that much, but still above. And you can see that big dip there in the graph for both eras. That's the August dip as fewer and fewer movies come out. We'll see if some of the movies like Weapons and The Naked Gun and The Bad Guys 2 can keep us above average for a bit. Because as we're going to see when we look at the cumulative box office through July, we did lose a little bit of ground, even though we had some movies that were actual hits. These were the top 5 films internationally this past weekend, so all markets outside of the US and Canada. The Fantastic Four First Steps debuted to a $100 million international debut. Like Superman, we also saw some weaker numbers than you might expect, or at least than we have seen for comic book films abroad, that were bolstered by the numbers domestically. In second place is a film called Dead to Rights, which is from China. Dead to Rights is set during the 1937 Nanjing Massacre, and it's looking to continue racking up huge grosses in China. Fantastic Four, just for reference, made less than $5 million this past weekend in China, which was worse than Superman. Comic book films internationally, but especially in China, are generating little to no interest, which is probably distressing for studios because for a long time, those Chinese grosses really helped to boost the overall worldwide box office. In third place internationally was Jurassic World Rebirth with another $23.5 million. Close behind was Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, which continues to do exceptionally well in Japan. It dropped just 39.4% and brought in another $22.1 million. And F1 the movie continues to be a draw internationally. It dropped 32.2% from the previous weekend and brought in $20 million. When you take those international grosses and combine them with our domestic grosses, we get the top 5 films worldwide, and the Fantastic Four debuts to $217.6 million in its first weekend. Superman brought in another $44.6 million. It's now over the $500 million global mark. Dead to Rights is in third internationally with its Chinese debut at $42.4 million. Then we have Jurassic World Rebirth at $36.7 million, and F1 rounding out the top 5 at $26.3 million. It's interesting because Superman is the number 2 movie worldwide, but in case you didn't notice, it was not one of the top 5 grossers internationally. Domestic box office is really doing a lot of heavy lifting there. So let's take a look at the opening of Fantastic Four and some of the marks that it set this past weekend. First of all, it is the 4th best opening, I guess that's pretty appropriate, of the year so far domestically at $117.6 million. That puts it about $7 million behind Superman's opening weekend and a little bit ahead of Jurassic World, which opened on a Wednesday, so that opening weekend number is a bit depressed. The Fantastic Four First Steps was also the 10th best opening weekend ever in the month of July. If you're talking about Friday through Sunday, it comes in behind Superman. So we've had 2 all-time July debuts over the past couple weeks if you don't adjust for inflation. Looking at all of the Fantastic Four movies made so far, and again, appropriately, there are 4 of them. First Steps easily takes the number 1 spot, basically doubling up the debut of Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer back in 2007. But look at how close Rise of the Silver Surfer was with the first Fantastic Four movie back in 2005. They opened almost identically at the box office. And then way in the back of the pack is 2015's Fantastic Four, or as I prefer to call it, Fant Four Stick, because that's what the poster says, with $25.6 million. When you adjust for inflation, the gap closes a little bit between first place and second place, and the first Fantastic Four movie back in 2005 actually takes second place at $94.9 million adjusted for inflation, with Rise of the Silver Surfer in third place at $91.3 million, and again, Fant Four Stick really lagging behind at $35.3 million adjusted for inflation. These are the top 35 MCU openings, and it's top 35 because that's how many I can put on this chart. Basically, the Marvels and the Incredible Hulk are the ones that aren't listed here. And the Fantastic Four First Steps really comes in literally in the middle of the pack, number 18 out of 35, just behind the opening of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a couple of summers ago, and ahead of the first 3-day weekend for Spider-Man Homecoming. And also you can see that there are just about as many post-2020 MCU films that have opened ahead of First Steps as there are that have opened behind First Steps. At least it's not in that last column with Shang-Chi, Thunderbolts, and Eternals. When you adjust for inflation, the Fantastic Four First Steps comes in 23rd out of the top 35, just ahead of the 3-day opening weekend for Spider-Man Far From Home, and about $5 million behind the debut of Thor: The Dark World. So that's basically where we're operating if you're going to try to look into context of opening weekend. It's around Thor: The Dark World territory. And much like the story was with Superman, it's not amazing and it's not a disaster either. It's really remarkable how closely these two movies have resembled each other, and we're going to compare them directly, but I also wanted to talk about the cinema score. That's one thing that the Fantastic Four First Steps and Superman also shared, an A- cinema score. And when you look at where that falls as far as the MCU overall, First Steps is with 6 other movies, including Thunderbolts, with that A- cinema score. This is actually the first time in a few years that the MCU has put out two movies that got a cinema score in the A range in a row. So I guess that's good. However, neither Thunderbolts nor the Fantastic Four were able to get into that A range where most of the other MCU films live, 19 of them. And then there have been 7 MCU films that are in the B range, including some recent ones like Captain America Brave New World, which got the lowest ever cinema score for a Marvel film. And I think what we're seeing with cinema score generally is a wearing off after many, many years of overall goodwill that audiences have for comic book films. I think that a lot of these movies are coming in about, one step lower than they would have 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that First Steps would have probably gotten an A cinema score if it came out in, let's say, 2015. I think that Brave New World probably wouldn't have gotten a B-, but people have been trained, and I think that they've been kind of worn down by a lot of not subpar, but definitely mediocre comic book films. Not all of them, but many of them. And so it's just part of this overall trend that I think we're seeing where comic book movies just aren't the hottest ticket in town anymore. They can still do very well, but it's not a slam dunk. When we look at the highest opening weekends internationally for the year so far, Fantastic Four comes in just ahead of Superman with the 8th best international opening at $100 million. Superman came in at $95 million over its opening weekend, ahead of Captain America Brave New World. And those are the only 3 comic book films on this list, and their numbers 8, 9, and 10. When we look at the highest worldwide opening weekends of the year, Fantastic Four comes in 6th place ahead of How to Train Your Dragon and behind Superman. And I want to take a couple minutes and directly compare Superman and Fantastic Four, not because they're both comic book films that open this month, but because they share some remarkable similarities. This is a comparison between some aspects of both of them. First of all, when you look at their domestic opening, they're about $7.5–8 million apart. They had similar budgets, Superman with an estimated reported budget at $225 million, Fantastic Four coming in at $200 million. When it comes to reviews, very similar, both certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, Superman with an 83%, Fantastic Four with an 87%, but they had a matching critics' average score. Critics, as of the time I was putting this show together, gave them both an average score of 7.2 out of 10. Metacritic score, very similar, a 68 for Superman, a 64 for Fantastic Four. As we mentioned, both of them with an A- cinema score, and both in very similar ranges when it comes to the audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes, or the popcorn meter, 91% for Superman and 93% for Fantastic Four. And looking at all of those things together, you might say, all right, well, it seems like they really match, so we should probably expect Fantastic Four to perform in the weeks ahead like we've seen Superman perform. But I think that there are a couple of factors that suggest early on, and again, this is just after opening weekend, that Superman may hold better or have been holding better than what we're going to see from Fantastic Four in the next few weeks. First of all, let's look at how they earned their money on their opening weekend. Superman had Thursday night previews that came in at $22.5 million. Fantastic Four actually came in ahead of that, the best opening preview nights of the year at $24.4 million. But look what happens on Friday. Superman outgrossed Fantastic Four on Friday, although it was very close. On Saturday, Superman outgrossed Fantastic Four by a wider margin. And again, on Sunday, Superman outgrossed Fantastic Four by about $4 million. So what that suggests to me is that Fantastic Four may be more front-loaded than Superman was. It did better in previews. It dropped off more as the weekend went on. And part of it may have to do with the audience that turned up. Again, the demographics for Fantastic Four were substantially similar to what we saw with Superman in almost every respect. The male-female split, when you look at the demographics as far as racial lines. But there was one where there was a somewhat small, but I think a significant difference. And that was the percentage of the audience that was under 35 for Superman versus the percentage of the audience that was under 35 for Fantastic Four. 71% of Fantastic Four's audience was under 35 versus 66% of Superman's, which means that Fantastic Four brought in a younger audience by about 5%. Superman brought in 34% over 35 versus Fantastic Four's 29%. And I know what you're saying, 5%. That's not a huge number, and it's not. But keep in mind, we've seen over and over again that movies that draw younger audiences tend to be more front-loaded. They make more money in that opening weekend, and they drop off quicker. And when you combine that with the fact that Fantastic Four already was more front-loaded in its opening weekend than Superman was, My guess is, and I've been wrong before, but just looking at the tea leaves, I think that we are going to see a bigger drop for Fantastic Four in week 2 than we saw for Superman, even though they had very similar opening weekends. And that's one of the things I like about box office analysis is so much of it is not just looking at the opening or digging down into one number, it's digging down into all the numbers and trying to see what's going to happen next. Of course, I don't know and nobody knows what's going to happen, but let's just say I won't be shocked if we see a bigger decline for First Steps versus what we did in weekend number 2 for Superman. And speaking of Superman, it hit a couple milestones this past weekend. First of all, it is now one of the highest grossing DC films of all time. It replaces 1989's Batman on the list. Batman had a great run as a top 10 grossing film, and it has almost caught up to Man of Steel's unadjusted domestic gross. It's less than $2 million behind what Man of Steel made. When we look at the franchise tracker for Superman, unadjusted for inflation, it's currently at number 3. It will soon be number 2. And then the question is, will it get to $330.3 million to unseat Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and become number 1? I think the odds are very good that that's going to happen. When you do adjust for inflation, Superman is currently at number 6. It's about $38 million behind Superman Returns, and then I think it's a bit of a tall order for it to get to $382.5 million where Superman 2 is. Not impossible, but it's going to have to keep holding well over the next several weeks, but it is going to move up this chart just a little bit. And when we look at the Superman franchise by worldwide gross, Superman is in 3rd place. It's the 3rd Superman film to crack the $500 million mark, but it's got about another $170 million if it wants to get up to 2nd place where Man of Steel currently is. And when we talk about the importance of legs at the box office, this is a chart that I introduced last week, and it's gotten a lot more interesting over the past week. Now, again, this isn't about profitability because these grosses have not been adjusted for inflation. It's about longevity. These are the day-by-day grosses of Man of Steel in blue, Batman v Superman in black, and Superman in red. And you can see how much better Superman is holding at the box office. It really took off versus the day-by-day gross of Man of Steel over the past week. I mean, it's just left it in the dust. And it is very close to overtaking what Batman v Superman was doing day by day. If you'll recall, one of the reasons that WB was so panicked about the DCEU was that Man of Steel and Batman v Superman took such steep drops in their second weekends. We have not seen that with this year's Superman. And this is why it's about more than just the opening weekend. It's about how you do over time. Previously here on the show, I've done what I call profitability breakdowns, where I look at how much a movie costs to make and market versus how much it's made in the theatrical window and estimate whether it's going to be profitable in the theatrical window. But I decided to change it up. I've been doing a lot of experimenting with some stuff here on the channel. So I wanted to look at budget only. So if you look at just how much a movie costs to make, has it made that money back in the theatrical window? What's the advantage of doing this? Well, first of all, I don't have to guess how much a movie costs to market because the reports about how much it costs to make, what the budget of a movie is, are much more reliable and easy to find. I'm not saying that this is going to replace my profitability breakdown, but I think that this is a good place to start. And I wanted to start with Superman. So let's look at my estimates on whether Superman has made its budget back. It hasn't done really anything in China. About $1.7 million coming back from China, about $82.1 million coming back internationally. And again, these are my best guesses on the splits. There's no paperwork that says just how much it's going to be. Some people estimate that the domestic splits are different from what I have. This is my best guess here. About $108.6 million coming back from the first week domestically, $47.7 million from week 2, and $12.4 million from this past weekend and going forward. So Superman has a worldwide gross right now of $503.5 million. I estimate a net coming back of $250.7 million. If you put that up against the estimated budget of $225 million, then by my estimates, I'm saying that yes, Superman has made its budget back theatrically. Now, you have to pay for marketing costs and things like that. That's what I usually include on this chart, and I may go back and include those again. But I think it's interesting just to look at the budget first. And just to illustrate how this would work for a movie that is not profitable as far as bringing back its budget in the theatrical window, let's look at Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. That movie, according to many reports, even after tax incentives, has an estimated budget of $400 million. And you can see that even though it has a higher worldwide gross than Superman, $591.8 million, I estimate that just $275.6 million of that has come back. And so by those estimates, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning has not only not made its budget back, it's still about $124 million in the red, and that's before you even talk about marketing costs. And I know some people will probably wish that I did include marketing costs in this chart. Again, I'm not saying I'll never do it again, but what this removes is the guesswork from not only how much a movie costs to market, but also how much it's going to bring in from ancillary revenue, from streaming and all of that other stuff. So let me know down in the comments below. Do you like this breakdown when it's just the budget? Do you prefer when I try to guesstimate what the marketing costs and look at the overall profitability? I experiment here on the show because I like to find out what you want to watch at home, because if I'm just making the show that I want to watch and you're not interested, well, that doesn't do anybody any good. Last week for our member poll question, I opened up the box office prognostication to you, the members here on the channel. I said, how big do you think the Fantastic Four First Steps will open domestically? And 64% of you were right on the money. You said in the $100 to $125 million range. 27% thought it would open to $125 to $150 million. Only 3% thought it would open to $150 million plus dollars, and 6% thought that it would open to less than $100 million. And for the member poll question this week, it concerns both Marvel and DC. Now that Superman and Fantastic Four have both hit theaters, my member poll question is, should Marvel and DC be more worried or less worried about the future than they were at the start of the summer? And I know that they're in two different situations, but I think that the movies have performed similarly. So your options on the poll are more worried, less worried, or if you think it's just too soon to tell, that is an option as well. If you're a channel member, you can vote in that poll right now. And if you're not a channel member, it's very easy to join. There is a link down in the description below where, depending on how you're watching this video, there may be a button that you can hit that just says become a channel member. Not only do you get to vote in the poll each and every week, but you also get early access to some of my videos, including videos like this one, as well as custom emoji and badges to use down in the comments section. I'd love to hear your voice because I love to hear what you're thinking about the movies as well. Before we move on from Fantastic Four and Superman, I also wanted to hit you with this week's Charts with Dan trivia question. The question this week is, how many times have a Marvel film and a DC film been numbers 1 and 2 in the same weekend at the domestic box office? We know it's at least once because it just happened this past weekend. It took me a while to research this one, so I'll give you a minute to think. Pause the video if you need to. And here comes the answer. The answer is 2. Though much like Thunderbolts, it comes with an asterisk. If you're talking about just Marvel and DC proper, then this past weekend was only the second time it's happened. The first time was a few years ago when Black Panther: Wakanda Forever was number 1 and Black Adam was number 2. However, that number goes up to 3 if you include imprints or other labels owned by Marvel and DC, because Road to Perdition, which was printed by Paradox Press, an imprint of DC, and Men in Black 2, which is printed by Malibu Comics, which was acquired by Marvel, were also 1 and 2 at the box office. So if you're including the extended library of Marvel and DC titles, the answer is 3. If you're going with Marvel and DC proper, the answer is 2. Well, we are just a couple of days away from the end of July, which means that it's time to check in with how the box office is doing this year so far. And we will start with the studios that have the highest market share. How many studios have sold the most tickets since January 1st? Usually I go back and look at the previous month, but I don't really have to this month because it's almost identical to what we saw at the end of June. Disney remains the leader with 27.15% of all ticket sales, though not by much. Warner Brothers is right behind at 26.69%, and they are just dominating this year so far. Paramount and Sony are both hovering right around 6%. Again, they have mostly been non-factors so far this year. And then we have Lionsgate and Amazon redefining the concept of not being a factor. They are both hovering right around 2% for the year so far. Coming up for the month of August, Disney has the remaining early weeks of Fantastic Four, as well as Freakier Friday and the comedy The Roses. Warner Brothers has the rest of Superman's run, as well as the buzzy horror film Weapons. That could be a summer sleeper hit. Universal has The Bad Guys 2 and Nobody 2. Paramount has The Naked Gun opening this upcoming weekend. Sony has Darren Aronofsky's latest film, Caught Stealing. And Lionsgate and MGM have nothing. So they will continue to not be factors whatsoever at the domestic box office. This is how the cumulative domestic box office for the year so far looked at the end of June, and we were over $500 million ahead of where we were in 2024. We were gaining ground on 2023, but how does that look at the end of July? Well, this is what the picture looks like. We're currently at $5.1 billion in July box office. We have a few more days to collect some more box office revenue that'll go on the books for this month. But generally, we lost some ground. At the end of June, we were about $500 million ahead of 2024. Right now, we're a little less than $400 million ahead of 2024. And at the end of June, we were about $300 million behind 2023. Now we're about $630 million behind 2023. And as we've seen, really, it's been the story for this entire year. We've seen some individual movies that have broken out, but there's not a strong bench behind those movies to help boost those box office grosses. And as far as the outlook for August, well, last year, Alien Romulus and It Ends With Us really helped to juice that August box office. So if we're going to try to keep pace with 2024, maybe even overtake what we made last year, we're going to have a couple of breakouts of our own. All right, let's take a look now at what I call our specialty charts, and we'll start with the per theater averages for this past weekend. The Fantastic Four First Steps leads the way with $28,520 per theater in 4,125 theaters. In second place, we have the documentary Monk in Pieces, which brought in $10,775 in just one theater. Monk in Pieces is a documentary about composer and artist Meredith Monk. Then we have Cloud, which continues to do well in extremely limited release. It brought in $7,420 per theater in 3 theaters. In fourth place, we have Folk Tales, which is playing in just one theater and brought in $6,702. Folk Tales is a documentary about a group of teens in Norway attending a folk high school in the wilderness, which puts the focus on survival and skill-based education instead of academics. And then rounding out the top 5, we had Superman, bringing in $6,324 per theater in just over 3,900 theaters. These were the top films in limited release for this past weekend, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer. Sayara leads the way with $1.28 million in 215 theaters. Then we have Oh Hi, which was in 866 theaters and brought in $1.1 million. Sorry Baby had its biggest expansion so far. It's now in 338 theaters in its 5th week of release, and it brought in about $400,000. Then we have House on Eden, which was in 600 theaters and brought in $313,000. House on Eden is one of the Shudder movies that they put out in somewhat limited release, sometimes low-grade wide release. It's a found footage horror film about paranormal investigators encountering a ghost in the wilderness, and the movie is actually a product of some creators here on YouTube. And then rounding out the top 5, we have Harihara Virimalu Part 1, Sword versus Spirit. This is a Telugu language historical drama from India. This is what the summer box office looks like so far domestically. Lilo and Stitch remains the easy leader at $420.2 million, followed by Jurassic World Rebirth, which is in second place. Superman has climbed up to third place, which knocks How to Train Your Dragon down one spot to number 4. Mission Impossible stays in 5th place, followed by Thunderbolts, F1, and Final Destination Bloodlines. The Fantastic Four First Steps enters the charts at number 9, and it will be climbing this chart, hopefully with some quickness. I know Marvel would prefer that. And Elio extends its stay of execution. It is bumped down to number 10, and basically any movie this summer that makes more than, let's say, about $75 million is going to bump Elio off of this chart. I can't imagine that we're going to get through August without another movie making at least that much. But for now, that means that I have not yet lost a film on my top 10 predictions of the summer. Elio is still alive. I predicted to be number 9. It is now on the cusp of elimination at number 10. It's been a bit of a mixed bag for me this summer, but I'm actually pretty happy with how I've done so far. And my final movie enters the theatrical marketplace this weekend, The Bad Guys 2, which I predict to be the number 10 movie of the summer, opens this Friday. I do have to say, though, I'm currently competing to get the furthest into the summer without losing my movies than I have in the 5 years that I've done this here on the channel. Back in 2021, I lost my first movie in mid-July with In the Heights, which is one of my worst predictions ever for a top 10 summer movie. Back in 2022, I got pretty deep, but I lost 2 movies on August 9th, DC League of Super Pets and Bullet Train. Back in 2023, I lost The Flash on July 5th. Yeah, I picked that movie pretty high. July. And then last year, I lost my first movie, which was Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, on July 29th. So if I can get to a charts episode that is published later than August 9th, I can officially get the deepest into the summer I've ever been without losing a movie. But again, Elio is very easy pickings. This is the 2025 domestic box office so far this year. A Minecraft movie is at number 1. Lilo and Stitch, though, is getting so close. This is going to be as close as I thought it was between what will the number 1 movie of the year be. It's currently about $3.7 million behind a Minecraft movie. Does it have that much left in the tank? We'll see. Jurassic World Rebirth moves up to number 3. Superman moves up 2 spots to number 4. That bumps Sinners down to number 5. How to Train Your Dragon gets bumped down to number 6. And then we have Captain America Brave New World, Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning, Thunderbolts, and F1 the movie. Fantastic Four obviously will be making a play to join this list at number 10 in the near future. Looking at the worldwide box office so far this year, Lilo and Stitch is in second place with just over $1 billion. Nudja 2 is in first place, and that number is going to go up because Nudja 2 is getting a wide theatrical release through A24, who's distributing the film, in just a few weeks. So we're going to see more added to that total. I don't know how much more, but there will be more. A Minecraft movie's in third, followed by Jurassic World Rebirth and How to Train Your Dragon. Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning and F1 the movie are at numbers 6 and 7. Superman moves up 2 spots to number 8, which bumps Detective Chinatown 1900 and Captain America Brave New World down to numbers 9 and 10. So that's what's going on at the box office. Let's take a look now at the world of streaming, and we'll look at the latest numbers from Netflix first. We'll be getting new ones later on today. At number 1, I love to see this because I really like this movie. For a second week in a row, K-pop Demon Hunters remained the number 1 most watched program on Netflix for the week of July 14th to the 20th with 25.79 million views. You don't often see this where a movie comes from basically nowhere or deep in the top 10, gets to number 1 and stays at number 1 for multiple weeks. Giving it a run for its money, though, was the new Netflix limited series Untamed, which brought in 24.56 million views. And then the Netflix movie Brick, which has also been a bit of a slow burn at 22.28 million views. Medea's Destination Wedding comes in 4th place. Amy Bradley is Missing, which is a docuseries about a woman who disappeared from a cruise ship, enters the chart at number 5 at 12.23 million views. Then we have Almost Cops and Squid Game Season 3 at numbers 6 and 7. Trainwreck Balloon Boy is at number 8, bringing in just over 7 million views. I remember that like it was yesterday. It's crazy that we're already doing retrospective documentaries on it. At number 9 is the Netflix original movie Wall to Wall, which is a South Korean thriller about a man who moves into the apartment from hell. And rounding out the top 10 is The Old Guard 2 at 6.17 million views. And Untamed put up impressive numbers for a Netflix original series. It was actually the second best debut for a new series on Netflix this year at 24.56 million views. Better even than Adolescence, although remember Adolescence started slow and then really caught fire, much like K-pop Demon Hunters. The only series that's premiered to better numbers so far this year is American Murder, Gabby Petito, Missing You, and Zero Day round out the top 5 on that chart. These are the most watched movies so far this year on Netflix, and these numbers are based on the latest ratings from Netflix, as well as the What We Watched report, which gave complete ratings for January through June. So it's kind of a hybrid of full ratings for the first 6 months of the year and then what Netflix has provided weekly since then. At number 1 is Back in Action at 164.7 million views, followed by Straw at 106.28 million, but K-pop Demon Hunters is right behind Straw. It's the third movie so far this year to break 100 million views. That moves The Life List and Exterritorial down to numbers 4 and 5. Havoc, The Secret Life of Pets 2, The Electric State, Counterattack, and Despicable Me 4 round out the top 10 so far this year. Looking at the most watched Netflix shows this year, again, a combination of reported ratings and the Netflix What We Watched report. Adolescence is at number 1 at 144.82 million views. Squid Game Season 2, though, including the views that it's gotten since Season 3 debuted, is close behind at 138.89 million views. Squid Game Season 3 is at 130 million views, followed by Zero Day, Missing You, Miss Rachel Season 1, the only non-original series on this list, American Murder, Gabby Petito, Sirens, Ginny and Georgia Season 3, and The Night Agent Season 2. And looking at the overall most watched programs of the year, Back in Action still leads the pack at 164 million views, followed by Adolescence and seasons 2 and 3 of Squid Game. Straw for the moment is at number 5, but K-pop Demon Hunters is knocking on the door of the top 5 at number 6. The Life List and Exterritorial are at numbers 7 and 8, and Havoc and The Secret Life of Pets 2 are at numbers 9 and 10. Let's take a look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. These are domestic numbers only, and they're delayed by about a month because that's how long it takes Nielsen to put them out. So this is for the week of June 23rd through the 29th, and this was the week that K-pop Demon Hunters became, for the first time, the most watched movie domestically. This is its second week of domestic release, but it was also number 1 here in the United States at 12.9 million hours watched. A Minecraft movie on Max comes in second place, followed by the Anne Hathaway Robert De Niro film The Intern in third place at 10.2 million hours watched. Then we have Trainwreck Poop Cruise debuting at number 4, followed by The Accountant 2, Plane, Miracles from Heaven appears on the list at number 7, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 hits the list at number 8, Snow White is number 9, and Straw is at number 10. These were the most watched streaming shows for the week of June 23rd through 29th, and this was the week that Squid Game returned, and it had a massive hours watched numbers here domestically at 53.4 million hours watched. Again, that's not just season 3, that's all 3 seasons of the show. Love Island USA, though, is putting up series high numbers at 29.6 million hours watched as it was approaching the end of its season. Animal Kingdom, Blind Spot, and The Waterfront round out the top 5, followed by Ginny and Georgia at number 6. The Bear, with its latest season debuts at number 7 at 15.2 million hours watched, followed by Bluey, Grey's Anatomy, and returning to the top 10, Bob's Burgers. And the debut week of Squid Game's third season brought in the second most hours watched for any series so far this year at 53.4 million. It's behind only the second week of Squid Game 2's availability at 76.5 million. In third and fourth place are the first 2 weeks of The Night Agent 2's rollout on Netflix, and then we have Ginny and Georgia rounding out the top 5. When we look at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, so it's total hours watched divided by number of available episodes, The Waterfront leads the way at 3.01 million hours per episode. And then coming in second place is Disney Plus's Ironheart. It rolled out its first 3 episodes on the week of June 23rd through 29th, and those brought in a watch time of 2.92 million hours per episode, so it didn't make the overall top 10, but it had good per episode numbers. Squid Game comes in third at 2.43 million hours watched per episode, followed by We Were Liars and America's Sweethearts. Ginny and Georgia, The Bear, Animal Kingdom, Blind Spot, and Love Island USA round out the top 10. And that's everything I've got for you this week. Before I go, though, I wanted to give you some options for stuff to watch, both in theaters and at home this upcoming week. First of all, today, a couple of recent theatrical releases are available for sale and premium video on demand. The Life of Chuck is available to watch at home, as is 28 Years Later, if you missed either of those movies in theaters. Tomorrow, on Wednesday, in some theaters nationwide, is the documentary BTS Army Forever We Are Young, which is a documentary about BTS fans. The band is still reassembling after completing required military service, but the fans are getting their own documentary. Also getting ahead of the weekend rush is Together, the really creepy looking horror movie starring Dave Franco and Allison Brie. I'm going to try to check that out and get you a review soon because this movie is very intriguing to me. On Thursday, the debut of Twisted Metal Season 2 hits Peacock, the first 3 episodes of this second season. I heard the show was good, but I've never actually watched it. If you did like that first season, though, well, get ready for season 2. Then on Friday, we have 2 big movies hitting wide release. The Bad Guys 2, which is on my top 10 prediction list, and The Naked Gun, which I'm very much looking forward to. I will definitely have a review for you of The Naked Gun here on the channel later this week. On Disney Plus, this is actually a surprise drop. Eyes of Wakanda, which is an animated series about the history of Wakanda, is getting what I think Disney called a surprise release on Friday. You would hope that maybe they'd publicize it more if they thought that it was really great, but it does seem like they're just kind of trying to get through the backlog at this point. There will be 4 episodes of Eyes of Wakanda. They'll all be available on Friday. On Apple TV Plus this Friday, you can catch the first 2 episodes of Chief of War, which is a new series starring Jason Momoa, who's playing real-life Hawaiian Chief Kaiana. And then available on HBO Max this Friday, Final Destination Bloodline. So if you missed it in theaters, and I actually quite enjoyed the film, you can catch it at home this Friday. Then on next Monday, because we may do the show on Tuesday again next week, the revival of King of the Hill will be making its debut on Hulu. And that's everything I've got for you this week. Be sure to stay tuned right here for more reviews as the week goes on, as well as my live show, which I'm going to try to bring back on Wednesday. I was traveling last week, so I didn't get a chance to do it, as well as any breaking news that might happen. We've had a lot of that lately. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you're notified when I upload a new video. But most of all, as always, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.